I'm Jesse Reiser. Nanako and I are principals at Reiser and Umemoto, RUR, Architecture. We are a firm presently of 12 people, and we have been practicing since 1986, believe it or not. So most of the work, I would say, because we're both academics, teachers, and practitioners, most of the work in the early years and really up to the present has centered around competitions. And we were fortunate enough to have won 2 major competitions in Taiwan 2 years ago, and those are the projects that are really currently engaging us today.
In addition to that, actually our practice started in '86, and then in fact we didn't do that much of competitions. We did all speculative work, our own work, and developed the smaller project ourselves, and we had a few clients to support ourselves. And when we hit 90s, we start doing major competitions. But also, at that point, we switched to the open competition to the invited competitions, so that the competition became sort of major support of this office.
Probably beyond what the profession would normally consider architecture, in that we are, keenly interested not only in the design and the legacy of building and the discipline of architecture, but our practice was really posed as a kind of medium to explore issues that extend to urban design and regional planning on the one scale, and then on the other hand, we're also very interested in the aspects of everyday life and design and how it intersects the everyday. So we sort of see it as a total work, even a total work of art, I guess, but one that would have ramifications that try to tackle the issues that are challenging cities.
Its architecture was sort of like, it's not like a normal profession for us, and so normally when you have a profession that can support yourself, but it didn't start that way. In a way, doing architecture was very addictive things, like it's like gambling, so that we can't stop doing that. So that was a really fun thing to do, and that's how we kept going to this point.
I think we're witnessing the erosion of architecture as a discipline. People are celebrating that because they see it as part of a wider ambition to extend to the design world and to all kinds of possibilities. But I think we're sort of held in a kind of tension between recognizing the legacy and the advancement of what can only be addressed through architecture as a discipline. That's one side of it. So it's kind of partially autonomous. But on the other side, we do have an ambition and a real interest in seeing what our projects do in the world and how they can actually beneficially affect the world. So I think it's more to do, this sort of tension has more to do with the kinds of pressures that architects are under today. Comes about across projects. So for us, it's less about redesigning the wheel with every project. Every project isn't completely different, but that there's a trajectory of work that happens across a few projects, and then new things arise that way. So in a funny way, it's less kind of market driven in the sense of trying to put out new product or new image, but more that we are try to mine a certain direction in the work and kind of work it through over a number of projects and finally exhaust those possibilities and move on to something else. But I think there is this sort of push to try to innovate, to try to explore from within the discipline.
In addition to that, I would say that innovation also comes through mixing different kind of medias. For example, like you mix with the idea of landscape and architecture, or architecture with urban designing things. When you mix those issues, and the very interesting thing can come out. So, but also that's the joy when you accomplish some kind of innovation in a project. That's the joy we feel, and then we can keep going with that.
I think it's, for us, I think we're slightly older, so we're not so much involved in the kind of the active networking, but I think from just the consequence of putting the work out on the net, and also the accessibility of information back to us, has changed things quite a bit. I mean, beyond mere data acquisition, I mean, it's the very fact that we can carry on projects remotely is the direct consequence of that. The 014 building was done by a series of players, none of whom actually come from Dubai. Even the general contractor, is Lebanese. So it was about this far-flung network, which worked through the internet to achieve a project. For a young person today, one of the things they should realize that I think there are a lot more potential opportunities and ways of creating yourself in architecture, so that they should be encouraged that there isn't a limited set of career paths. You can actually create yourself and even create your own audience. And I think we've almost scratched the tip of the iceberg on that, especially with the dissolution of larger firms, or maybe the polarizing that seems to be going on between really large mega firms and then the explosion of small firms. The small firm or the young architects coming into the field are like startups. And I think they can really kind of forge a very, very different identity than the kinds of possibilities that we faced 20 years ago, let's say.
Actually, the teaching creates lots of network because, especially U.S. school, you don't have that many American students. When you teach places like Columbia, Princeton, or other schools, majority of students are foreign students. And then usually you teach what you are very interested in that moment. And so that in that way that these students take over the ideas and expand from our ideas, and they go back to their own countries and they keep going our tradition. So at this point we have a lot of the old students, and they became our friend, and they're all over the place in the world now.
It's probably the old model. I mean, it's less about whatever happens on Facebook or anything like that. But it's we're teachers, and we've been teaching. I've been teaching for almost 20 years, and the work that we do is a consequence of who we're talking to and who's working on projects that might be similar. So the networking, I think, is absolutely essential for architects, both in terms of kind of creative discussion, but also critique. So in American schools, projects are assigned around certain themes, and then you have the opportunity to see what the students will produce, but also how your colleagues will react, to those themes and how you're kind of nuancing them and so forth. So the networking is extremely important.
If you love something, you can always tie it to the architecture, so that's the entrance, how you enter the field, I would say. Some people may like to make things, and some people may like to draw, or some people like to do the computer games, or some people like to do making movies, and then gradually you can get into architecture. So it used to be very limited how you enter the architecture, but now, because of computer technologies and other things, there is lots of different ways you can enter.
For a young person today, one of the things they should realize that I think there are a lot more potential opportunities and ways of creating yourself in architecture, so that they should be encouraged that there isn't a limited set of career paths. You can actually create yourself and even create your own audience. And I think we've almost scratched the tip of the iceberg on that. Especially with the dissolution of larger firms, or maybe the polarizing that seems to be going on between really large mega firms and then the explosion of small firms. The small firm or the young architects coming into the field are like startups, and I think they can really kind of forge a very, very different identity than the kinds of possibilities that we faced 20 years ago, let's say. We had, I guess, very early success, tied probably to the economic situation in the late 80s, that where when we got out of school, we were able to sustain ourselves. We had commissions, mainly landscape scale commissions and kind of sculptural installations. That all dried up in 1991, and so we had the sort of makings of an office, and then had to shift over to teaching to make a livelihood to sustain the office that way. Also, I think because Nanako worked mainly in Japan and I worked mainly in Italy, we had a completely unrealistic picture of what it's like to practice in the United States. We patterned this office around the studio of Aldo Rossi, who probably nobody even remembers anymore. But so it was, and the whole idea that one could be a kind of public intellectual, you could write in the morning and then do design in the afternoon, was something just so appealing to me and so interesting that, that was the basis for, starting this practice. So our accountant, of course, thought it was a hobby for many years. It wasn't really a serious, concern. But, I think one has to find their own way. This was certainly not, an office that was planned with the idea of making an enormous profit. It's more of a kind of a loose cadre of people interested in cultural issues who find a way to keep going. And now we're, of course, suddenly for the first time facing a situation where there's much more money involved and much more responsibility, and the consequences are larger. But the whole kind of foundation was much more along the lines of, a speculative office, you could say.